I have been in that position now for 28 years. And when I started fighting Reagan and his crowd, General Danny Graham and crazy George Keegan and Senator Malcolm Wallop and Edward Teller and Dick Cheney and whatnot, and the ones that didn't die off, like Teller and Danny Graham, the ones that didn't die off came right back with George W. Bush. But what they did back then in 1982 and 1983, they got Reagan, who had not the clue what he was doing, and I don't think George W. Bush did either. They were useful idiots to these global criminals. And they got Reagan to sign a defense guidance document in 1982, which did two important things. One, it on the larger scale, it ended our policy of using the military to prevent a nuclear war, and we went from a policy of war prevention to one of war fighting. And in that document, written, of course, by Richard Pearl, part of the Cheney crowd, in that document, he ordered the Department of Defense to prepare to fight and win a protracted nuclear war. Now, that's chilling, and that was leaked to the press by my old friend Bob Scheer, who used to be with the Los Angeles Times, and eventually, of course, because he was a good, honest reporter, he got himself fired. He leaked that defense guidance document, and there were many of us, I think, at the time, who said, well, you know, when we went into the military, it was to protect the people of this country by preventing a nuclear war, not going out and fighting an aggressive nuclear war. So we wouldn't have any part of that kind of policy. The second thing that defense guidance document did was to order the Department of Defense to deploy Star Wars weapons in space as soon as possible. And the document assigned those weapons two missions. The first mission was to destroy opposing satellites and seize total military control of space. The second mission was to destroy targets on the surface of the Earth from space without warning. There wasn't a word in that document about shooting down ballistic missiles. That whole peace shield garbage was a total myth for consumption by the American people, who would never have approved Star Wars weapons for offensive purposes.
And now we've gotten another bird's eye view into their mindset with Cheney having Georgia on 8/88 2.5 years ago, launched that sneak attack. And we've seen Iraq, we've seen Afghanistan, they now want to go into Iran. We see this doctrine in the PNAC documents from 2000 where they say we need new Pearl Harbor events, we need terror attacks to get the American people to go out there and wage these wars of empire. But this isn't even an empire for the American people. It's an empire we pay for. It's an empire for these big mega banks and corporations. Please continue with the Star Wars program, but let's start at the beginning. Because it's now declassified, it's now public, it's now admitted. We heard that Ronald Reagan launched Star Wars in '81, but then now we've gotten the Bohemian Grove documents that they released to Santa Rosa State University, Bohemian Grove did, that in 79, before he was even president, they were there talking about the program that the Air Force had that you ran, that they were going to weaponize. So that's now been released and the San Francisco Chronicles reported on it as well. And so what was that program when you ran it? How advanced was it? Again, the information that's out there, nothing classified. And then projecting forward, what do they have today? And so what were you developing versus what they took it and created?
Well, I retired in 1978, and the program had been going on actually since 1962. At that time, they called it BAMBI, which stands for Ballistic Missile Boost Intercept. Isn't it lovely the way they take our weapon systems and give them a nice cuddly name like BAMBI? And when the Soviets for a while were working on a similar system, they dubbed it the killer satellite. So anyway, that's just a little trivia. But at that time, in the mid-1970s, we were working on several pieces of it. Most of what we were working on was toward a system of laser battle stations. And these laser battle stations were being developed in bits and pieces. We had a contract with TRW for the laser itself, chemical laser. We had a contract with Kodak and with PerkinElmer to build a 50-foot diameter actively cooled mirror which could reflect the laser beam to its target without burning up. We were developing the pointer tracker system and the fault-tolerant spaceborne computer with Raytheon. And we had system studies to put it all together with Lockheed. So that's a little of what we were doing with laser battle stations. We were also, and by the way, in our studies, and we also had some other organizations doing studies for us, Aerospace Corporation and RAND Corporation, on the military effectiveness of these things. And the RAND Corporation study concluded that before a system of laser battle stations got good enough to be effective against ballistic missiles, they would be powerful enough to incinerate cities in minutes, causing the kind of firestorms that consumed Dresden and Hamburg and Osaka in World War II. We also were looking at kinetic energy kill vehicles, the kinds of things that later became brilliant pebbles, smart rocks first, then brilliant pebbles, and then rods from God, where you take a few pounds of metal properly shaped, fired at the Earth from space, and it impacts like a meteorite, and at least in theory is capable of destroying hardened military targets like missile silos and command bunkers totally without warning.
That would be DU. That would be DU, correct, Doctor?
That was what?
Those meteor gun weapons, would that be DU, depleted uranium?
Yes, and I never said that at the time, but yes, they're a combination of titanium and depleted uranium, titanium shell with the depleted uranium interior, and guided by GPS. And I never revealed those details at the time, but a couple of years later, I was debating one of the General Abramson's colonels in the Strategic Defense Initiative organization, and I started talking about the pure offensive purposes of Star Wars weapons. And in his rebuttal, he said, "Now, you know very well that those titanium cones fired at the Earth from space and directed by GPS, that program doesn't exist." And he said, well, I said, well, that's interesting because you just revealed classified details that I've never talked about and certainly didn't mention in my talk. So obviously the program does exist. And so since then, I've been able to tell more details.
Now, when we talked, you said you're also allowed to reveal that it's robotic space planes, and you've been out of this for a long time, but yep. I mean, from when I've talked to people at NASA here in Texas, people who were on the original Apollo program and beyond, and some of them we've had on air, and these are guys you can watch the NASA film footage, and there they are on mission control. They say that more than 90% of NASA, which is run by the Pentagon and by the president, is military, and that basically Wernher von Braun drew up the space shuttle in the 30s. It's a 1960s, 70s, 80s technology, and that the space program we see is really a facade for a larger black op system, and that the militarization of space is just off the charts right now. And I mean, what can you speak to along those lines?
Right. Well, space has been militarized for a very long time. Most of the stuff up there are military satellites of one kind or another, either reconnaissance satellites or military communications satellites and various other things.